Welcome to Monet Cafe. I hope you will enjoy this tutorial of a painting I'm calling Joyful Morning. It will be an alcohol wash with soft pastel. So I hope you will enjoy, and I hope you will subscribe if you haven't already. A few months ago, I created this video using the same technique with an alcohol wash, and you guys obviously loved it because it got nearly 90,000 views so far. So I decided to do another tutorial using the same technique and also share with you a tip on how I often take my own paintings, ones that I like, and I convert them. I create a new color palette arrangement, and often I will flip-flop or mirror the image. For this painting, I used a majority of Terry Ludwig pastels, and this is the Maggie Price Basic Values 60 Soft Pastels. This set is lovely. These are the pastels I'll be using for the underpainting. I don't believe these were from the Maggie Price set, but I chose to do a warm underpainting using some pinks, orange, and some purples. And this is the alcohol that I use, just regular alcohol, and some brushes that I love. They're very textured, and I think they give a neat outcome for the underpainting. We want it loose and painterly to begin with. And here I am, ready to start. It was a joyful morning. I often like painting in the mornings. The sketch portion will be sped up a bit, but the remaining portion of the painting will be just a tad sped up in order to keep it small enough to upload, basically. I'm using here a piece of willow charcoal or vine charcoal to get in something very basic. I don't want to overwork anything at this point. And now I'm applying the pastels that will serve as the underpainting colors. I'm using this purple. It's not the darkest value I'll use in the painting, but it's the darkest value for the underpainting. I talk about underpaintings a lot and the value of using them in your paintings. They really do create a good impressionistic base for beginnings. Now I'm using it's kind of a wine color. I get my darkest values in first, and vertical things like trees are almost always darker, but background trees get a little bit lighter in value. Now normally I wouldn't choose a warm color for background trees, but I know this is just the underpainting. And here comes the alcohol. I'm going to be using my stiff bristle brush. I always use some paper towels to control the amount of alcohol. Like if I have too much on my brush, I just dab it onto the paper towel. And then I just start working. And if you try this, it takes some finesse to figure out how much alcohol to use. You don't want too much and you don't want too little, but lean more on the side of too much because these drips are what make the lovely impressionistic feel of the underpainting. Often I'll use some of the residue of the color that's on the brush, like I'm doing here, to paint a lighter value in areas that I know won't be quite as dark. So I'm really painting using the pastels as a painting medium. And I often work in sections going either from light to dark or dark to light, and I rinse my brush out in between so as not to contaminate areas too much. It's okay if some things drip into other areas. Again, that really makes that nice impressionistic feel. But if you're trying to keep an area light, such as the sky, you know, I didn't want to get too much of that dark into the sky. That's why I'm kind of working in sections here. So now you can see I'm just using my brush in a really loose manner, letting it be fun and free and have some drips. And here's another example of me using some of the pastel on my brush. Notice the directional strokes. I wanted it to feel like this was almost like a valley and there's a river cutting through it. So I'm kind of, it all kind of blends in anyway, but I'm giving the idea of that motion of the hills in the background. All right, and now I'm using a little bit of a rust color, some more wine. I know I want a nice warm underpainting for the green grasses. That's one of the reasons, that pastel had a little bit of a ridge on it. Sometimes you have to turn around a little bit, but I wanted a nice warm tone for some of the cooler grass colors. Now this pink, here, let me go ahead and put this river in. I'm using my vine charcoal again to put in the stream that's kind of cutting through the little valley, and just going to keep this really basic, and I think it's just a compositional element really. I don't want to give too much detail to it into the painting because I already knew I wanted yellow flowers in this. I rarely paint with yellow flowers, and I just had a feeling I wanted to do something happy and joyful. Now, for those of you here on Monet Cafe, I am actually going to be adding some music pretty soon at this point and let you guys just follow along with some subtitles I'll be adding with more information and instruction to the video. The remaining part of this video will have full commentary for my patrons on my Patreon page. They're so awesome to support this channel. If you don't know what it is, it's patreon.com/Susan Jenkins, and it's just a way people can support my channel to keep free videos coming on Monet Cafe and get a little extra instruction. So that's what I often try to do, is give them some extra, and so they will get the full commentary for this. But you will still learn a lot by watching this process. It will not be sped up this much when I finish the underpainting. But very quickly, before I move on to the pastel, I wanted to let you know I'm adding the music that's the same song for the previous alcohol wash video I mentioned, because so many people loved this song. It was just so peaceful and relaxing. So I hope you'll enjoy this. It's from the YouTube audio library. I can get my music there copyright free. The songs aren't very long, but this one is called Frolic by Jammy Jams. And keep an eye out for the subtitles, which will have some additional instructional information. All right, relax and enjoy. And now, patrons, here is your Patreon-only content. I just love talking to you guys. I feel like we're all together. I know I'm pre-recording this, but for some reason it feels like we're together. All right, now I'm using this dark, and I'm going to give you the color notes at the end of this video. So those little color marks that I'm making on the sides, I'm going to give you a video at the very end of this one that I will describe each color and where I used it, so hopefully that'll help. And in that video I talk about this dark. I can't remember, I usually grab the dark Terry Ludwig eggplant color. I like it for a good dark for trees as a base. And but I realized I couldn't tell if this was the Terry Ludwig or if I actually grabbed black, which is a color I hardly ever use, so I'm not sure on that one. But anyway, a good dark for the values of the trees. Now this is obviously once the alcohol underpainting has dried. Okay, so there's the dark, just the foreground trees, that one bank of trees to the back in the right, and the pathway in the front. And now I'm using, this is the same purple that I used for the underpainting. But because I did a wash, you know, it lightens the colors a bit. So I'm just kind of reestablishing some of the values. And even though I know in my mind I was going to have a field of green grass and yellow flowers, I wanted to get some of these warmer tones down. And even with these distant trees, I know I'm going to make them greenish, you know, they're far away, so that's why I put down the cooler colors as the base, such as those purples and those blues. I'll later add a little bit of greens on there. And now I'm using a piece of pipe foam insulation. You guys have probably seen I use different blending tools, sometimes depending on the paper I'm using. I had a note at the beginning of this video. This is not UArt, this is Fisher 400 grade or grit paper. Now it's almost exactly like UArt paper, but it doesn't curl. Many of you have experienced the same thing I do with papers curling. So I'm loving this Fisher paper. I get it from a company called Pro Art Panels. So you see how using this pipe foam insulation is just softening everything a bit, and it's really giving more of the value. And I use it like a paintbrush too. I just grab some color sometimes, like if I'm working on some of those darker trees, and I use what's on the pipe foam insulation to blend in other areas. Now there's my note, and there's my note to you. Light touch is the right touch, and I am trying very hard to keep a light touch, because sometimes we can get heavy-handed, right? And this blue I'm adding to the background sky. I wanted that warm glow behind it. Now I do end up making the sky, before it's all done, primarily blue, but I still believe that the underpainting has a bit of an influence on the final mood and color. We try not to cover it up totally, but you know, sometimes even if you cover up the majority of it, it still does give a little glow behind there. Notice that I put the more of a teal, a warm blue down at the base of the trees, and now I'm using kind of a value that's in between both of them to do a little blending. You often can let the pastels blend themselves rather than grabbing the blending tool every time, whether you use pipe foam insulation or a paper towel or whatever. So I usually only blend at the beginning stages like that. This is that nice blue that I like to use for background trees. It really pushes things back because things cool off in the distance. And I will add some green again to those trees back there, but it's usually only after I get down my values and my coolness. And it also depends sometimes how far away the trees are. These, you can tell they're pretty far away because they're smaller. And so I definitely don't want those values too dark in the distance. All right, and now I'm going to start working on these foreground trees here to the left. This is a dark, dark green. It really looks kind of black right here, but it's a dark green, and it's just going to add a little bit of interest to these trees. I mean, while I always say you want to get values right, which is value is king, you also can use multiple of the same values to give some color interest. Now notice this blue that I'm using here. It's kind of a neutral gray blue, not too light in value, and I'm using that versus the green that I used in the foreground trees because that bank of trees is further away. And what we're doing when we're painting, I often like to say, is we're creating the illusion of depth. And if you just keep those rules in mind, the general rules of how things cool off in the distance, they get lighter in value, and they get more neutral in color. Doesn't mean you can't sometimes add a little punch here and there. But in the foreground, they are darker in value generally, depending on the subject matter. They are warmer, usually in color, depending on the subject matter. I mean, if grasses are going to be warmer in the foreground than they are in the background. And they are, what did I say, lighter or more punchy in color. So if you keep those things in mind as you're working, you will create that illusion of depth successfully and have stronger paintings. You can see it in these trees. The trees on the left are closer, they're darker. You'll see eventually they're going to be warmer. I'm going to add some more of those greens. Now this green, before I go on with that point, is a little bit lighter than the other dark green. So it's still a dark value green. That's why I'm using it kind of as those, this is going to be the roots of those, what are those flowers called I made there? Like buttercups. I wasn't positive on the type of flower I was going to make. I just knew I wanted them yellow. And then I happened to think, oh yeah, those little buttercups that when I was a kid used to pick them. And I don't know if any of you did this. You put it under your chin, and the light from the sunlight reflection would reflect up under your chin, a little yellow. I can't remember why we did that as kids. But anyway, just a sweet little memory. Now that was a little bit more of a neutral blue that I used in the sky there. And this is a little bit of a darker blue. As you probably know, colors get a little darker in value up in the upper heavens, and they get a little cooler. And also, whenever you're going towards tree branches and things, usually the color gets a little darker, a tad darker in value. You don't want things so light in value as sky holes in your trees. I'm using the pastels just to soften the sky and blend it. I don't mind skies being a little textural sometimes, but I knew the flowers were going to be the star, and I didn't want any competition with the sky having too much detail. Now I'm using that other green in the trees to kind of warm them up a bit. Now back to my point, again, those trees are the darkest in value because they're closer. And they're a little warmer in color temperature. They'll gradually get even warmer than this. The next trees that are closest to you are the ones on the far right. And they're going to be lighter, a tad lighter in value, and not quite as warm in temperature. And they gradually just keep getting lighter in value, cooler in color temperature, more neutral in color as they recede. And again, if you can do that, you create that beautiful illusion of depth. Now, I wanted a little break in these trees. It looked like a big old mass of trees. I do work on this a little bit more. I had too much of that going too far back in between those two trees. So, you know, we're kind of working on things sometimes as we're painting. But I try not to get too keyed up or tied up in one area too long, because your painting will get tight very quickly. I knew I had almost the majority of everything filled in except for this little stream. So I'm just using a kind of medium to lighter value blue. And notice how sometimes I use my right hand. Any of you lefties out there, I know I have some lefties as patrons because we've talked about it, but we have an advantage in that we have to use our right hand a lot for a lot of things that are right-handed in this world, and we get a little bit better at being ambidextrous. But I have to sometimes, or I've purposely learned to, because often my camera's in the way. To get over to the far right of the paper, sometimes I have to move, and then my back is in front of you guys and the camera. So I have conveniently learned, or am learning, to use my right hand more. Now I wanted a little bit more of that orange glow that I originally had as the underpainting. So I just added a little bit and softened those trees in the background, that little edge between the trees and sky. Now what happens with values as we get closer? They get a little bit darker in value and a little bit richer in color. So that's why in the stream I'm just laying it on its side. And usually with water, when you paint water, you want to go horizontal. You don't want to go vertical. Water lays flat. You want that as a level, flat line with water, except for reflections. Reflections, you pull them down vertically. I do add some reflections later with that water. So now see how I'm just glazing. Remember my note, light touch. See that I'm still seeing the warmth of that ground showing through. And now here I'm using the right hand again. I'm just glazing over that field. Nothing's going to be very in detail back there. So we're just kind of making a little blanket of grass. Later I will add some of the yellow flowers back there. Now notice how I got a little darker in value and a little warmer in color temperature. Why? Because I'm working kind of on that middle ground. It's not as far back as those distant fields. And I'm really starting to love being able to work with two hands. It's a lot more efficient and fast for painting. All right, now I again kind of made that little break in between the two trees a little less obvious. So, you know, it's just a little, I like to think of painting as a dance. It's just this little dance and you work the whole. You don't get too tied up in any one area. And I've gotten close to almost having everything, well, you really block everything in with the underpainting, but then when you get to the pastels, you want to get everything basically blocked in with the layer of pastels over the pastel alcohol wash underpainting. I really love doing a pastel wash or alcohol wash underpainting. I think it just creates a real dreamy effect. I know I use a lot of different mediums for underpaintings and I love them all, but often I'll go back to one of them and I forget, oh yeah, I really love this technique. So now you can see this is sped up only barely, okay, because I think it took me about 2 hours for this painting and I didn't want it to take that long. So, oh, and you can see right there, I just added to the upper right side of the stream there, almost creating like a bank, like it's sloping down to the stream, and adding that dark really gave it that kind of rolling feel. And now is where I will add a little bit of this green. Notice this is kind of a neutral green. It's not real highly saturated in color, and it's not super dark in value, but definitely not light in value. But I'm really using, now I went a little lighter here with this green that I'm getting, breaking up the base of those trees in the background. I don't like anything to be a straight line. I think I even work on that a little bit more. I'm also using now this little bit of a lighter value blue to give the illusion of some of the trees that are just a little further away. Like, I love creating that sense that things just go on forever into the distance. That's just so fun. All right, now I'm adding a little more of that bank of grasses on the side of the stream there. In a little while you'll see me give the reflections to that. I'm using that purple. I know I want the painting to be consistent and have a cohesiveness with color, so I'm using some of that purple in areas where I think it would be. It'll be a little bit more in shadowy areas, at the base of trees or in the depths of grasses, and I don't want to get it too far in the distance because it will not be correct with value. So I barely put it there and I wasn't quite sure. It was okay because I just put it at the base of those trees, not on the tops of the tree branches. I think I even lightened that up later. I felt like that was a little bit dark in value there, but not too bad. And now is where I have added a little bit of purple below that bank of the grasses on the top side of that stream there. I'm adding some of the colors that are above the water. I'm adding it below. This is where you do make vertical strokes. I'm just kind of pulling down just a little bit. There won't be a lot of reflection here. And now I'm using my pipe foam insulation to just pull down, make it a little bit blurry like a reflection would be. And that's how reflections really work. They usually are vertical, the reflections, and then we can add a little light glazing of a lighter value typically over the top, and it really creates that flatness of water. I haven't finished the stream at this point. You'll see me do that later. But now I'm working on some of these flowers. Now, something I found very interesting when I was learning about color is I realized when I bought some darks like the Terry Ludwig dark set, I was like, well, are there dark yellows? What's a dark yellow? A dark yellow is a brown or a real rusty color. So these are some of the flowers that I know are going to be a little bit more in shadow. They're kind of behind that grouping of trees to the left. Oh, and by the way, my concept of where the sun was in this painting was way behind those distant trees, coming from the backfield area, shining forward. So my tallest flowers, kind of in the middle, are going to have the light reflected off of them. And these other flowers that are deeper in the grasses, they're going to be a little darker. I thought I'd add a little bit of an orangey color as the base and then gradually lighten them. So typically with flowers, like I've talked about in many videos, is we get a darker value down first as a nice contrast to the lighter value that we'll add later. So that's why you see me kind of working these flowers. You're like, wait a minute, I thought I saw the painting, the flowers were yellow, why aren't they yellow? The yellow would look very flat if I didn't give it another color to contrast with in value and with just some color energy. So if you really look at nature too, you can see there's a lot of color interaction going on with things in the shadow, with the petals sometimes in shadow. Some are deeper into the center of the flower. They're going to be a little darker in value. So it's really how things work in nature, and we're just trying to figure out a way to do it when we paint. As I always say, there are stages of a painting. I'm not quite there yet, but there was a stage when I rewatched this video that I really liked the simplicity. So I need to perhaps do a little video series where we work on keeping the simplicity and not overworking paintings, because that would totally be a lesson to myself. And often it really, one of you patrons just made a comment about that. You were recreating one of my not sunflower, they were little daisy videos, and you mentioned, oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was, which patron it was, but you mentioned that working quickly really helped you keep that energy and the feeling of life, I guess. There's probably my words, not yours, but it was something like that, and that absolutely is true. And sometimes when we just keep working and keep working and keep working, we end up just over layering and getting too much color, and our paintings start to lose that spontaneity. So right now with the flowers, I was really liking this light, airy feel. I could have left the flowers just really smaller little flowers that were kind of indistinguishable, but I had it in my mind I was dead set on painting some yellow flowers. So that was what I was working towards. Now I'm using a little bit of that darker green, still kind of working in and around the flowers here, occasionally turning the Terry Ludwig pastel on its corner, that edge, to get some ideas or representation of grasses growing. Not everywhere. Now I'm going to be working with, now I'm adding a little bit more dark just to develop some contrast in the foreground. I always feel that correct values and contrast in a painting is what's really going to make the viewer drawn to it or not really want to look at it very long. And when you have your I call it a focal point, because it's one of the strategies of focal point, is wherever your contrast is highest is usually where the viewer's eye goes. And I also know that I want some deeper values of contrast around those yellow flowers, because that again is the focal point. The flowers are going to be bright yellow, the roots and the grasses around it are going to be darker, with some lighter grasses on top, but that's going to create that contrast rather than just so many light flowers that there's no contrast there. So that was kind of my thought process with that. Now I'm going to lighten that bank up I just worked on there a bit, but I felt like it needed a little bit more value. And now I've chosen a green I haven't used yet. It's a little bit warmer in value than the background field, the green I chose for the background field. It's a little bit darker in value. So I'm kind of carving around these flowers. And by the way, with the flowers, I was purposely trying to create a song, if you want to think of it that way. That's, again, I equate music and art so much together, to where it had some motion and energy, but nothing too static. Now this is a little early on for applying a fixative. Sometimes I will apply a fixative to an area to darken it and get a little bit more texture. And normally I wouldn't do it at this stage, but I felt like, you know what, I really want to get more of these lighter grasses and flowers to be able to sit on the top of this dark contrast. So when you spray a fixative like this, and I actually like it when it gives those little drips like this, it really gives some texture. Now I'm adding a little bit of that green. I told you eventually I would add a little bit of green to those trees to warm them up a bit, but not too dark of a value. It still makes them feel far in the distance. But again, this fixative is going to give a fresh texture on top of the layers I've already done for me to add some of the grasses and the flowers that will feel more like they're on top. In essence, what I've done is I've buried these flowers, if you want to think of it that way. I think the most common question I get on the YouTube channel is, do you spray your paintings with fixative when you're done to protect them? And I think that's because it's a great question. I mean, I used to think that too, is what do you do to protect your paintings? And you guys, if you've been a patron long, you know my answer is no, I don't, because it does what it just did here. It darkens the whole painting. And everything you've worked on, you're like, if you want your painting to be, you know, a whole value degree or two darker, then that's fine. But normally I don't, so I don't spray it. But I will use it during the working process to bury something, to make it a little darker, so that I can add a lighter value or get a little bit more texture to get those softies on top, the softest pastels on top. So, and now I know my field is going to have some of the yellow flowers cascading into the distance. So I'm just laying my Terry Ludwig, this is one of the Maggie Price sets, on the side, and I'm just kind of glazing over and in and amongst some of the green there. Now I played around with this probably a little too much. I didn't get all of the areas of yellow exactly where I wanted them right away. So I had to fiddle around with it a little bit, and probably fiddled around with it too much. You guys probably know what I'm talking about. Now we know these flowers are going to do the same thing like the trees and everything. They're going to be so far away that they lose detail in the distance. I did want a little bit of a brighter area in certain areas where the sun was shining on some of the flowers more than the others. But they're going to gradually get larger in size. They go from being very horizontal in the distance to gradually starting to get a little vertical, but the little groupings of of flowers are closer together when they're in the middle ground there, and then they gradually, as they get closer to the foreground, they develop their own individuality, and they're more detailed and they're a little further apart than those very, very distant flowers. All right, patrons, now I'm going to add some music for you guys as you watch me develop these flowers. And here's my point about, gradually they're starting to show a little bit of their little tops to the flowers there, a little closer together, and then they just ever so gradually start to become the larger flowers in the foreground. But I've actually, I need to go check on my mother-in-law. A lot of you guys know we have her here, under hospice care, and it's really a blessing. I will tell you that. She is so appreciative. I think I got an overdose of a nurturing spirit anyway. I don't know. Maybe it's just from being a mom and loving my kids so much. But I love being able to do the things that she can enjoy, which one thing she can still do is eat. And I love to feed her. So I'm going to go check on her. And you guys enjoy this. But I'm going to be back for commentary in a little while. After this part, you'll see me zoom in to the flowers when I start to really add some of the individuality of the foreground flowers. So enjoy this music while I paint, and then I'll be back in a minute. was beginning to wrap things up at this point, and also I decided to add, I had in mind that I really wanted this to have some complementary color interest, and yellows and blues just look so good together that I decided to add some bits of blue, like maybe little blue shadows, little blue flowers. You don't have to spell everything out, but it just created a little bit of variety in the foreground and interest, and kind of connected things with the blue in the water and the blue in the sky. So I felt like that was fun. And you know, I had so many stages of this painting as I looked back on it that I really liked. And I'm constantly reminding myself to keep it simple. Now, I zoomed in here a little bit so that you can see this is going to be the lightest value yellow. Once again, all of the yellows were from the Maggie Price Basic 60 set of Terry Ludwig pastels. Because these are such a wonderful quality of pastel, very buttery, they just really layer well on those final stages. And here's the final. I loved how the one flower was like reaching up into the heavens, and it definitely felt like a joyful morning. So another point of this video was not just the alcohol underpainting, alcohol wash I should say, but also how you can take your own paintings and play around with them. I popped this one in Photoshop. I really like this. I might try to do a painting similar with this color palette. Isn't that cool? And this portion, once again, patrons, is for you only, where I'm going to talk to you about my color choices. All right, patrons, here is your exclusive content with my color notes. And I'm just going to zoom in here and give some commentary and point. I thought this would probably be an easier way to do it. These here are the colors that I used for the underpainting. Did I use that red? I don't think I did. I think it's just these. I used, you'll see if you rewatch the video, that was the darkest color. This is the wine color I used. This was the background field. I added some rust to the foreground field, and this was the sky and the river. All of those 5 colors I used for the alcohol wash underpainting portion. Then I added my darkest dark. This is the Terry Ludwig eggplant color. Now, it looks black here, but it's actually dark purple, I think. I'm pretty sure it really does look black here. And this is a red I used just to get a little bit more warmth in the foreground field. These over here are the sky colors. I used the darkest blue is the upper heavens, the upper portion of the sky, gradually working. I think this was the lightest portion, which is just over the horizon. And I used this color. It's a little bit warmer, has a little bit more teal in it. Not much, but I use that to kind of soften edges and blend things together. These were some of the colors of the background trees right here. And I think I even used a little of this lavender in the sky. I think I should have had that in the same line here. But these are the background trees in here. Now, these are the greens and the grasses. My darkest green and the greens that give some green to the trees. I had put down such a dark value. So I use this as kind of that warmer tone that I put in some of the foreground trees. Again, these are more of the background trees. I did add a little green, I think, to some of the background trees, one of maybe this green with a real light touch. These are my more neutral greens. I use some of these in the background fields. I think I just duplicated this color here. I just made another note here. And then these are the colors of the flowers. Most of all of these are from the Maggie Price 60 basic set of Terry Ludwig pastels. I think all these were. I'm not positive about that one here, but hopefully you can see these colors. And you probably saw at the end, this you work the flowers dark to light, okay? You get the darkest value down first, especially the flowers that are going to be buried. These are even some of the buried flower colors right here, because I know they're going to be in shadow. So instead of, I mean, what is dark yellow? How do you make yellow a darker value? Well, it's brown, really. Okay, so you lean more towards browner tones for darker yellows. I mean, you could cool it off too if you added a little blue, layer or a little purplish layer on top of it too. You wouldn't have to use like a brown tone. So anyway, oh, and then I added little pops of blue. You can see in certain areas. I really wanted that feeling of a complementary color palette with I knew the sky would be blue and the flowers would be yellow. So I hope these color note little videos like I'm doing right now are helping you to see the colors And I know you guys don't always have all these colors, and I totally feel you. That's where I have been, or had been, for years. Sometimes I still don't have enough colors. But so we just work on these things and get things as we can afford them. So that's just the way it is with this medium. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned a lot. And as always, I hope you share it in the homework album. Can't tell you what joy I get from looking at your work. It literally takes my breath away sometimes. I'm just so excited that you're doing the work and enjoying and learning. All right, guys, happy painting.